So this afternoon, we're going to have a special presentation, and we are honored to have with us this afternoon the founder and president of Art and Dust Productions and Cotton Pickin' Films. And I want to introduce to you now Lauren C. Snowden.
Thank you, Mom. So just a little context to introduce you into this next little segment. I think most of you all know by now that I'm a screenwriter, a filmmaker. I teach film studies at Moorpark College. I actually just recently got tenured, and I'm the head of that discipline there. Thank you. Thank you. So some of you might know this if we're friends on Facebook or if you heard it. I had a really tremendous opportunity last year to interview Jamie Foxx for my school for our Black History program. He was very magnanimous, hilarious. If you want to watch that interview, it's available. But the reason I bring it up is not to name drop, but just to say that I was a little bit anxious about doing that because, you know, he's this big celebrity, but I have to just tell you that there's no person in this entire world that I feel more honored to be able to interview than my dad. So, Jamie Foxx ain't got nothing on my dad. And he's a really, really great guy, okay? So what we're gonna do now is there's a show that's called Inside the Actors Studio. Some of you may know it, some of you may not, but James Lipton was one of my favorite people, and he would conduct these really wonderful interviews with filmmakers and writers and actors. And so my mom had this great idea that we do something a little bit more dynamic than just a slideshow. You know, a slideshow can't capture a person. And since so many people know my dad from so many different contexts, I feel like everybody in this room has probably had a nice conversation with my dad at some point, right? At least one. And the things that he said, I'm sure they stuck with you. But nobody can get the full picture. So I've basically put this thing together. I've been having lots of extra conversations with my dad to put this together for you. And the idea is that we hope that we can just give you kind of an overview into some of the general areas of my dad's life, the people that have made him who he is, the experiences that have made him who he is, and that's what we're gonna take the time to do right now. So Daddy, if you would please come up. Hi, Dad. So when I asked you, Dad, what you'd want to accomplish with this talk, what you said was that you wanted for people to feel hope and inspiration. You wanted people to feel encouraged when they left this conversation. Before we get into the conversation, though, if you all see, you have a little bookmark at your table. And this bookmark represents kind of the thesis of this conversation. And it's called Revolution of Rising Expectations. Dad, would you kind of tell me where that came from, that phrase?
I don't remember if that's something that I heard or something that I made up. But when I started teaching, one of the things that I realized that a lot of my students came from the same kind of background I came from. And that background meant that, you know, you had nothing, didn't expect nothing, and was not able to strive to have something. And so what I told them was that the rising revolution of expectations is that I've never had anything, but once I have something, I'm never going to have enough again the rest of my life. That means that I continue to learn, I continue to advance, and I continue increase my possibilities.
That's awesome. It was Pastor Lauren had said earlier that you would always, preface everything most when you're talking with, I used to always tell my students, right? So what this bookmark represents is several words of wisdom, nuggets of wisdom that my dad has said to us as his children. He said these things to his students over the tenure of his teaching legacy. So Dad, let's start at the beginning. So your early years. So if we could just give people just a small glimpse into your life, what I would like to paint a picture of is what was it like growing up, where you grew up in the time that you grew up? What was going on at that time?
Well, I grew up in Oklahoma. It was a segregated state. This meeting could never have happened there because blacks and whites were not allowed to fellowship with each other, to participate. We were not allowed to go to the same school, drink out of the same fountain. If we walked on the sidewalk, they had the right of way. We had to step off in the curb so they could walk on the sidewalk. Those are the kinds of things that I grew up with. It was pretty devastating to me as I got older because I could never figure out why people thought so little. They didn't even know me, and so I've said to people before that if you thought about what's going on now, if you have an art with somebody, you can get an attorney, you can go to the police, you can go to your church or your priest, to your you help from many sources. But what if you were in a situation where all of those people were on the same team and they all was against you? We had nowhere to go. You couldn't go to the police. You couldn't even go to the priest. You couldn't go to an attorney. We couldn't even get into a hospital or rent a motel. And that's the kind of thing that I grew up with. It was heart-wrenching and really hard to understand.
And in that context, we're gonna get a chance to meet your siblings briefly later on. But what was your life like at home?
Well, my mother was 14 years old when I was born, and by the time she was 30, she had 8 kids. She was most of the time a single mother, and she was not very well educated, but she was very intelligent, and she would teach us the best she knew. She taught us how to work. We worked in the fields most of the time. I never really thought I'd be able to do anything else. I worked in the fields till I was 20 years old, and I thought that was life. Everybody I knew did that. Everybody I knew lived in the same neighborhood, and where I lived, you didn't live in the neighborhood where white people live. We all lived in a black neighborhood, went to black school, and that's kind of how it was. So, but my mom always tried to get us to be hopeful and not to find ourselves in a hopeless situation. And when I was 15 years old, she came home one day, and my mother didn't drive. We never owned a car. And when I was 15 years old, she came home one day and she had this car. And she said, "We are leaving." We had 2 days to say goodbye to everybody. Teachers, friends, neighbors, everybody. We were out of there, And to show you how much experience she had, when we was on the road and she was driving, and she would look in the rearview mirror and she'd see a big truck coming, and she would pull off the road and wait till the truck passed by so she would get back on and drive on. But the car only got us to Texas, and then we were stuck there for a while. But she never gave up on my uncle. I had an uncle that wanted to keep me and my sister, my oldest sister. He said, "You take the rest of them. I'll keep these 2, and I'll make sure they get an education. I'll make sure that they don't want for anything." And my mother said, "No." She said, "If one of them will starve, we will all starve, but none of them will ever look down their nose at their brothers and sisters." and she kept us together.
Unfortunately, I never got to meet Grandma because she died before I was born, but I'm told I look a lot like her.
Yeah.
So, and you mentioned that Grandma was very smart. She was intelligent, but she wasn't educated.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel it's pretty fascinating because your story started off very much like that. You used to say that you, of all the people you ever knew, you never thought you would be somebody who would be a teacher teaching other people. Before we get into that, we'll get back to that question in a minute. But I remember 2 stories that you told us growing up about 2 teachers who had a really big impact on your life. This story you told me about the oatmeal. You remember that story about the bowl of oatmeal? Can you tell us that story?
Well, when I was in elementary school, they had a big day. Once a year, they'd have a day where they have a breakfast at school, and everybody would bring a box of cereal and a bowl, and we would have breakfast together at school. Well, we never had cereal, I mean, we couldn't afford cereal, but mother, she always fed us oatmeal. And so I told my mom, I said, Mom, I'm not going to go to school today. I said, they having cereal, and I don't want to go to. She said, oh yeah. She said, you're going to go to school. She said, I'll fix you some breakfast, and she fixed me a bowl of oatmeal. And those of you, I don't know how many of you guys eat oatmeal, but you can't let oatmeal get cold. I mean, yeah. I mean, you could use it for baseball. I mean, when they get to that point. Anyway, so I went to school, and I had it in a little brown bag, and I went, and the teacher was standing in the door when everybody would come in, and she would usher them into the room. And when I got to the door, she reached out and she grabbed my bag and took my bag and handed me a bowl and a box of cereal. And that impressed me so much. I mean, I was scared to death. And I knew the kids were going to see my oatmeal and they were going to laugh, but she expected that, and she was there to wait for me. And that was the most beautiful teacher I've ever seen in my whole life. And she was my hero.
Awesome. That's awesome, Dad. And then there was this story that you told us about the dirt and the skin color. Your PE teacher, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
What happened there?
Well, I told you we was in a segregated state, and people they would come by, they would yell out of the car, they would call you names and things, and just humiliate you, and we were in junior high school, and several of us kids was together, and we heard they called us some names and stuff, and we were gathered in the gym, and we were talking about it, and we were pretty devastated. And so my PE teacher, his name was P.E. Powell, and he came up and asked us what was going on, and we told him. And he said, why do they hate us? They don't even know us. And he said, well, he said, it's just because you're here. He said, think about this. We're all made out of dirt. God made all of us out of dirt. He said, if you was a farmer and you was going to plant a crop, would you want to plant your crop in white sand and red clay or black mud? And we said black mud. We worked in the field. We know what where you plant stuff, And he said, well, you were made out of the best dirt on the earth. So you don't have to take backseat to anybody. And I think from that day on, my hope was risen. I mean, I didn't feel so bad about myself anymore. And they could call me names and stuff, but I'm thinking I'm better than you. I mean, yeah. Yeah.
Made out of the best stuff, huh, Dad?
Best stuff.
So I think that's actually a perfect transition into the next section. So education, you and Mom, like Ray said, you raised us to believe in the power of education in our lives, and you and Mom both retiring out of education. You spent your whole life's work, pouring into other people and mentoring other people and teaching other people. But in your early days, a couple things that you said used to fascinate me. One, that you could barely read when you graduated from high school. So how did you get through high school if you could barely read?
Well, I think to say that I graduated is kind of a misnomer about it. I think they just kicked me out because I was too old. uh, I when we came to California, I had to drop out of school to work in the fields, and I worked in the fields for a couple of years, and before I was able to go back home and go back to school. And I was older than other kids. They said to me, if we let you go back into school, we're concerned you're not going to finish, and if you start missing and things like that, we're just going to kick you out. And I said, no, I'm going to go. I'm going to keep going. And so I decided then that I would go. I didn't know when I got out of high school, I didn't know how illiterate I was. I was a good athlete. In those days, athletics was big, I mean, you was a good athlete. They kept you in school so you could play sports, And to show you how bad it was, at the high school I was at, and I loved that high school. I mean, there's nothing against them. It's just how it was. But they had a bunch of us that were not very studious. And, but we were good. We were good athletes. I ran track. For some of you older ones, I ran track against guys like Tommy Smith, and people like that, during that day. And so all of my classes consisted of PE and shop classes. I didn't have to take English and history and all those classes, but I was a really good athlete. And so they gave us, to make us feel better, I guess, several of us, they gave all of us gold uniforms for PE. So when you saw the gold uniforms, these are athletes of the school. Couldn't read and couldn't write, but we were well recognized, So, and then when I got out of high school, I wanted to go into the Army, and when I went to take the test for the Army, I failed it. I found out since then nobody fails that test, but I failed. I think it was the Lord's hand on me because I didn't need to be in the Army, but I failed the test, and the only ones who would let me take it a second time was the Navy. I didn't want to go in the Navy because I couldn't swim. So, but anyway, I wound up in the Navy, and in the Navy. Well, let me back up just a little bit. One of the most important things I think happened to me in my life was that in high school, I didn't have to take the academic classes, but I took a lot of shop classes. I cannot to this day tell you the last thing I learned in an English class, but I can tell you the first thing I ever learned in a shop class. And I took those shop classes and I used it, and when I got into the Navy, I was vocational, and I moved up the ranks very quickly because I knew the job, I knew how to do it, and I knew how to pass the test because those questions were things that was my normal life. And so that's how my education started in the Navy. And when I got out of the Navy, I decided I wanted to go to college. And well, I started after I got married. I needed to go to college because I didn't have enough money, and I found out that the Navy I could take 2 classes a semester and I could make $75 a month, and I needed that money. So I said I'll go to class. When I run out of time, I quit. I never expected I was going to learn anything, but I was going to take the shop classes and get the money, and then when it ran out, I'd be done.
So to that, when you're in the Navy, you taught yourself how to read. How did you teach yourself how to read?
My favorite thing to do outside was to go watch James Bond. I love James Bond. And they had a lot of paperbacks, James Bond. And Western books. Very easy to read. Kindergartners can read those books, and so I collected them. and I would read those books, and a lot of the words, you know, one of the hardest words I had to learn was how to pronounce Veronica in the Archie comic books. It took I don't know how many years it was before I learned how to say that. But that's how I started learning to read, and I read those books because they were of much interest to me. And the other stuff, you know, but I love those, and so I started learning how to read with those books. And I had a friend whose dad was a truck driver, and he read Western books. And when I would come home on leave, I'd bring a big bag of Western books, and I'd give him my bag, and he'd give me his bag. And I'd go back to the ship, and I'd read them. And that's how I started.
That's awesome, Daddy. I mean, you know, just fortitude and resilience, I think, are two great words to just kind of describe those early years. You definitely had a lot of challenges and trials, you know, having to quit. I mean, I think we have some students living, you know, in this area too. I mean, sometimes we have those students who end up having to quit school to work in the fields and just the agricultural area. And you know, I think that's also something that's really fascinating, and it also goes to the testament of how universal humanity is. It's not about, oh, the black people had to work in the fields. It's like it's a certain context, it's a certain circumstance that you find yourself in, and it's not one color, right?
That's
right. And through that you and Mom were able to kind of show us what that was like and how compassion is so important. Mm-hmm. When you were in the Navy, you also said that you were bashful. You can never believe it now, right? But that, you know, that being in the Navy helped you to kind of find your confidence. What was kind of like one of the most significant takeaways from the Navy that you got? You know, you talked about being a petty officer. What did that do for you?
Well, one of the first things I learned when I was in the Navy was that the people with the lowest rank had to do the hardest work. And so I figured out that if every time I put a stripe on my sleeve, that was a whole lot of fools I didn't have to listen to anymore. So I work hard to get those stripes. And yeah.
And so as a petty officer, but also with the time that you were in the Navy, you know, so socially, what was going on with, you know, the separation and things like that. You being a petty officer, you told me something about the respect that you got from having that title.
Well, you know, one of the reasons I went to the Navy is I couldn't get a job. You know, you wouldn't give me a job doing anything. And so I thought if I go to the military, they're not going to have prejudices in there, you know. But I was wrong. They did have those in there. And what happened was that when I started making rank, a lot of people who had to work for me didn't like that. They didn't have that respect for me. And so, you know, they didn't appreciate it. What happened was that once they realized that I really knew the work and I knew the job and I could keep them from a lot of hurt, harm, and danger, then they started to listen more. But the more rank that I got, the more respect that I got, and I liked that. And so it also taught me that you can't be a wimp and in the military. You know, you either gonna. But I tell people all the time now, you know, and I had people that say, well, you know, there's a job come open. I said, you gonna apply for that job? No, I'm not. That's too much responsibility. I don't want all that responsibility. And I said, well, you're gonna have the responsibility anyway. I said, there's only two things you have to think about. One is you can be the fool in charge, or you can work for him. And so I always thought I know what kind of fool I am. I don't know what kind of fool that's going to be that I have to work for. So I'd rather be in charge.
Yeah, that's wisdom. That's wisdom right there. So now another thing that and I'm sure there's people in this room who probably been contributors to this part, but you know, you talked about how through your time after the military, you know, college was something you didn't think you could do, and then, you know, you could never thought you would have the job that you had at Allen Hancock College. It was a long trajectory, right? And we can't cover all of it in this time, but the biggest thing I feel like that you brought out of that conversation was that there were certain people, and one person in particular, who, because of him, you ended up where you were. Can we talk a little bit about him, and just like if you could tell us that early time, you know, at that time when you were the least confident, and how he came into your life and what he did for you?
Well, as I told you, I wanted to go to college so I could get that $75. I didn't have any hopes of learning a whole lot, you know, but I needed the money. And when I got into when I went to go to college, the counselor told me that I should not try to go to school because, you know, I'm going to waste my time and waste their time, and there's no way I could pass those classes. And I said, but I need to go to college. And they say, well, you can't pass. I said, well, what happens if I don't pass? And they said, well, if you don't pass, we'll kick you out of school. And I said, okay, if I don't pass, kick me out. And so I went to school. My welding instructor, for some reason, he saw something in me that I didn't see, and I guess nobody else did either. But he really took a liking to me, and he started teaching me and helping me to learn. He used to push me so hard, and I remember at one point, that he was pushing me to do something I really thought I couldn't do, and it was so frustrating. I was in my booth, and I closed the door, and I was crying. I said, why don't he just leave me alone? I told him I can't do this. He said, but yeah, you can do this. You can do this. You know, you can do this. That man had me running for vice president of student body at the college. And I got beat out by a football player, but I ran. We had a club called Vocational, and he got me in there and competing against other students at different schools. And I wound up going to the national competition. And at the national competition, I wound up taking second place because that was the time when my oldest son was just a little baby. And I guess Michael was there about then. But anyway, that's the kind of thing he did to give me confidence. And when I finished the community college, I went to work in the oil fields and other welding concerns. And I'd be working. I was down in Bakersfield working. That's 75 miles from where I live. And he shows up on the job, and he says, just in the neighborhood, he says, just wanted to see how you was doing. And I said, I'm doing fine. He said, we need you to teach. I said, I can't teach. I said, I can barely read and write. He said, you can do this. I said, I can't do it. And I get all excited. He said, hold on, don't get excited. Just calm down. Just calm down, you know. And then he would leave. Next time I see him, the same thing, you know. So then I stopped working in Bakersfield. I was working in Fresno. And I was on my way home from work one day, and I was tired and just worked the day. And this car pulled up next to me, and he's blowing his horn, and he said, pull over, pull over. And I said, who was that? And it was him, my welding instructor. So I pulled over, and he got out and came up, and he said, you going to school? I said, no, man, I'm working. And I said, I can't go to school. He said, come here, let me show you something. So he took me out of the car and put it around in front of my car. He spread these papers out on the top of my car. And he said, this is the program you're going to take at Fresno State, and these are the classes you're going to take, and this is when you're going to graduate. I said, okay. So I went to school. The second semester at Fresno State, I went to see what classes I had to take, because I had to work full-time all the time. And I went to school part-time. And so I went to see what classes I need to take the next semester. And my counselor told me what classes I need to take, and said, this is how much it's going to cost you. And I said, well, how much time do I have to get the money together? He said, well, you got a little bit of time. I said, okay. And I started to leave. He said, are you going to have the money? I said, yeah, I'm going to try. And I started leaving. He said, you know, if you drop out of school one more time, you're not going to make it. I said, I'm going to try to have it. And I started to walk out the door. He said, wait a minute, hold on. He got up and he pulled his checkbook out of his pocket. He wrote me a check for my tuition. And so he said to me, pay me back when you're doing better. Well, when I was doing better some years later, I went back to see him, and he was already retired, and nobody would tell me where to find him or anything. So my wife and I decided that the only thing we could do is pay it forward. So we never allowed a student to come to us and ask for help that we didn't try to help. If it was money, if it was books, whatever it was, so we've done that.
I remember even when we were in elementary school, players from the basketball team and the football team, they would be coming over for dinner and spend the holidays with us that were from places like Ohio and Florida, New York, and that's just a big part of our memory. I'm sure all our siblings remember that. And so because of that, Mom, on the top of the invitations, the title said Celebrating 80 Years of God's Favor. And, we're just getting like tiny little sprinkles of what that favor looks like, everybody who's here. But the fact that that instructor poured into you like that, and, it's not like, I'm sure he didn't have a to-do list. Like, let's see something I can do that's really, significant, and I'm going to check this box off, right? He was compelled to you. Mm-hmm. And you told me about another time, there was one class that you needed to finish school, and the instructor, the instructor, he was the only teacher teaching the class, and the class was completely full. Mm-hmm. And what happened when you went into that class?
Well, at that time, I was working on my master's degree. And I had already got one extension for 7 years, and I'd run out of time on that, because I'm working, I get tired, and I quit, and I go back after a while, And so my counselor told me, you got one more class to graduate, but you don't have any more time. If you don't do it by summer, your catalog is going to change. And you're going to have a bunch of new classes you got to take and so forth. And I said, okay. And so she called me at home, and she said, you haven't registered for that class. I said, no, I've been busy. He said, you got to get in that class or you're not going to make it. I said, okay, I'll go do it right now. And we did it on the computer. So I would go on the computer. All the classes were full. And it was just no openings. So I called her and I said, well, I guess I'm not going to be able to graduate. I said, all the classes are full. And she said, oh, no. She said, but why don't you just go to class anyway, and maybe the teacher will let you in. I said, okay. I wasn't even smart enough to be early. I was the last one to get there. The room, people were lined around the wall all the way out into the hallway. And I showed up, and the teacher said, guys, he said, I'm sorry. He said, you can see my class is well full. I can't take anybody, not another person. Of course, everybody was disappointed. We turned to go, and he said, except for you. And he pointed to me. He said, I have to take you. And they put me back in, and I got in the class, and I graduated. So I say that, God has been most good to me, and I have to recognize that. And that's just a couple of instances where people reached out to help me who didn't really even know me. But you know what? I'm sitting here looking out here at all my friends and family and cohorts and colleagues, and this is what America's supposed to look like. I had a chance. I had a chance to be bitter and angry and hopeless and just a miserable human being. I had a chance to do that, but I didn't have the right to do that, because God had put all of you people in my life to make sure that I had something better to think about.
Well, you're doing so great with these transitions. We didn't even rehearse this. Do you know that? So the next big area of your life I want to talk about is love and the Lord. So everybody knows my mom, Eleanor, and this is one of my favorite stories for my dad to tell how you met my mom. But you got double or triple the blessing, right? Because you got my mom and you also got Jesus.
Yeah.
So can you tell us how you met my mom and kind of like that early courtship, and then and then just what the Lord has meant into your life and how you've instilled it into us?
Well, I didn't grow up in church. Like I said, I only had my mom, and she always told us, that we didn't have anybody else. That's just us, me and my 8 brothers and sisters. That's all of us. And but when we moved to Tulare, my mother and my wife's mother were good friends. They got to be really good friends. And my wife's mother had 11 kids, and my mom had 9. And so we all the kids kind of paired off. One of my wife's older brothers and I were best friends. She was best friends with one of my sisters, and younger brother was best friends with my younger brothers. And so we all kind of knew that, But when I went away to the Navy, my wife was a snotty-nosed little 6th grader. And I said, well, when I came back from the Navy, she was in college. And, a friend of mine was sitting out in the friend's yard playing cards and stuff. And they drove by in a car. They had an old 57 Ford. And I saw them, and he said, he said, that's those girls I was telling you about. And I said, those are the Richardson girls. I know those. I know them. And he said, man, those are some nice girls. And I said, okay, so, we saw him a couple of times coming around, and I decided that's who I'm going to marry. Well, my wife's brother and I, when I got out of the Navy, we had a house together. We rented a house together. He bought half the furniture, and I bought half the furniture. He bought the bedroom set and the living room furniture, and I bought the bedroom set and the dining room furniture. And we figured when we split up, each of us would have half house worth of furniture. And so that's what we did. So when I decided I was going to marry her, I told her brother, and he just fell out laughing. I still don't know why he was laughing. So then I told the other brother, and he just fell out laughing. I thought, no, goodness. And so one day I worked really in the early wee hours of the morning, and so I slept during the day. My mom didn't have a car, so she used my car. And one morning I was sleeping, the phone rang, and I woke up, and it was my wife on the phone. And she said, I was on my way to work, and my car broke down. And she said, could you give me a ride? And I said, sure. She was at the gas station up on the corner, so I thought I'd go up there and get her. But when I got up, my car was gone. So my mom was using it. So I walked up to the gas station, and I told her, I said, my mom's got the car, but when she comes back, I'll give you a ride. So she said, okay. And so I wound up taking her to work, and I picked her up, and I took her to work, and I picked her up, and I took her to work, and I must have did that for 3 weeks before I even asked her to go out, and I finally asked her to go out with me. To this day, we've talked about this a lot of times over the years. I don't know why she called me. I wouldn't even thought she had my phone number, but she did. And we have been together now 54 years. So. One thing I'll add to that, my wife is very compassionate. The reason I know the Lord is because of her. When we started seeing each other, if I wanted to spend any time with her, I had to go to church because she's always in church. We didn't have no other time. And so I started going to church. But, the thing was that her family were staunch believers, And when I saw the way they acted with their family, remember, I only had a mother. We never had the loving and hugging and kissing kind of relationship that my wife's family had. And so when we started dating and I saw that really impressed me. And I liked that. And the people at the church treated me really, really good. And it was just an awesome experience. And when I accepted the Lord in my life, when I said, I believe, my whole life changed. People started coming into my life. They poured into my life. And many of them, I'm sure, don't even know why they did it, but I do. And I give God the credit for it because they didn't know me. They had no other reason to do it. But life is good.
Amen. Amen. So that brings us into our last section, which is your career legacy. And so my life verse, since I was a kid, is Proverbs 16:9. A man's heart plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. And I was thinking about when I was reflecting on, this talk and everything, and just realizing, like, wow, that's truly what your life has been like. And going back to that welding instructor that you talked about early on, I mean, he just, in movies, there's something called a motif, right? It's like a repeating theme or a person or an object, something that you keep seeing over and over. And this instructor for you has been a huge motif in your life. And your career here at Allen Hancock College started because of him, did it not? Mm-hmm. So let's just talk, as we close out, just how you got here, what the part he played in that, and that legacy that you left at Hancock.
Well, at that time I was teaching at an adult school, and I started the welding program over there, and it was a pretty good job. I was working about 50 to 60 hours a week, and this job popped up on the screen. So I went to my welding instructor and I asked him if he thought I could do that job, and he said, "Of course you can do this job." He said, "Go ahead and apply for it." And so I did. And when I applied for it, I came over and we had a interview. And we had to do a welding test, And so I came over I had my whole family out there, sitting out there in the car while I was in there taking the test, And it was hot, and and I thought you can't leave them out there too long, so I couldn't fool around there too long, I got through the oral interview and I went to do the test, and it was I don't know, 5 or 6 of us, I guess, I don't know, but anyway, I kept looking to see if the other guys were finished. And it seemed like they were just slowing around, and I thought, I got to get out of here, So I did my test and went on back and got in the car and we left. Well, they called me and told me that I was the one they wanted. And there's a guy sitting in here who had a big hand to play in that. I met him when I was in those national competitions, named Ron Dominguez. I hope I don't embarrass him, but I want people to know who he is. And he's sitting in here somewhere. But anyway, yeah. Yeah. So anyway, I told my welding instructor, I said, they want me to hire me. He said, good, let's go see what we got. And he took a day off. We drove over here and I didn't even know where Hancock College was, before. We drove over and went through the shop, and he showed me some things in there that needed to be done, and how I might think about doing it, and so forth and so on. And I got the job. I came over here, and he was getting ready to retire in a couple of years, and he was going to move to Carmel. He loved golf, and he's going to move up there. But when I came over here, he called me one day, and he said, I decided I'm going to retire early, and he said, I'm going to move over there where you are. And he says, can you get me a job? And I said, sure. And so he came over, he taught for me for 15 years. And during that time, he was my advisor, and he's just making sure I wasn't screwing things up, But, he's 90-some years old now. He's up in Oregon. I call him on a regular basis to see how he's doing. But I am so appreciative and so thankful for the life that I've had, for the people that I've met, the people that's part of my life, and the people that's made me who I am, and who kept me from being the person I could have been. You know, there's some things that and the last thing I want to say on that is that I have so much to be proud of. But here's my priority. I'm so proud to be a child of God. I'm so proud to be a member of this congregation. The people, my family, my friends, my co-workers, my cohorts, I'm so proud to be this. And I'm proud to be an American.
Thank you so much, Dad, for the honor of sitting beside you and having this conversation. We have these talks all the time, daily, multiple, right? But it's different, though, to be able to be here and to be able to pull these things out and present it for all the people in our lives who mean so much to you. And I just want to say, on behalf of my family, thank you to everybody who's here, who's poured into my dad's life, and to our lives. We've grown up with so many of you, and we've been taught by many of you, and the thing that the last thing I want to remind you is, if you haven't had a chance, and you could please get over to our little display area over here. This is just the tip of the iceberg of things that he's been able to accomplish. But just to mention a couple of things, he mentioned the Vocational Industrial Clubs of America. He mentioned he got a new building put in, a new industrial technology building put in at Hancock before he moved on and retired. He started a welding trust that many people in this room have contributed to keep that program flourishing, and groomed a very capable and wonderful instructor to take over the program for you as well. And it's really kind of cool, because the same thing that Les did for you, then you did for Gabriel, and that program that we have now is still flourishing and growing, and just hopefully this generational thing will just continue to go.
Mm-hmm. I would like to ask Gabriel to stand up. Gabriel was one of my students about 35 years ago or somewhere in there. And I heard somebody say one time that if your ministry dies when you die, then you're a failure. He keeps me alive. The program is great. It's a good program, and any of you who thinking about getting involved in it, you should meet Gabriel and see what you can do to help him, because well, you know what? Let me do this one last thing, and I'll shut up. I promise. You know what? I always had to apologize to my students, because I could talk a hole in a brick wall. I was talking. I said, I'm sorry, I've talked so much, but I'm not going to quit. I mean, I'm not telling you I'm not going to do it anymore, but I'm sorry this time that I did it. But the thing is that I just, there's a lot of ex-students in here. Could you all stand up, all of those who were ex-students in the Hancock program? Not necessarily under me, but. Yeah. And I tell you one thing. There are some awesome craftsmen in here in this room, and they made me look good. But I tell you what, I'm so happy that all of you showed up here to help me. I hope I haven't bored you to death, but you have made me happy. I'm a happy camper. Yeah.
Thank you, Dad. If we could just give him a nice round of applause. Congratulations, Daddy. All right. So as we transition, are you up? As you transition, the last thing I want to just say, just to kind of compliment that, is at your table there's a little table marker. All those table markers represent places that my dad lived on his journey from Oklahoma to here, organizations that he's been a part of, like Vocational Industrial Clubs of America, sponsored businesses like Melford Borzall and other enhanced use blacksmithing, people who have poured into that program, poured into my dad's life, all those different, and if you go around the tables, you can see those are all just different glimpses of his life. So thank you so much for your patience.